I never told my son-in-law that I spent 28 years working undercover for the Drug Enforcement Administration, chasing cartel money through banks that were never supposed to notice me. To him, I was just a tired old man who fixed lawnmowers in his garage and fell asleep in his recliner by 9 o'clock. He told my daughter that if she ever left him, he'd make sure she never saw her own son again. She left anyway. And when he pulled into my driveway with two men I'd never seen before, well, let's just say I already had the coffee on. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. And if you believe a father never really clocks out, hit that like button and subscribe to the family. The call came in at 6:47 in the morning. My phone doesn't usually ring before sunrise unless something's wrong, and I knew it the second I saw my daughter Rachel's name on the screen. I answered before the second ring finished. Dad. Her voice was so quiet I almost missed it. Dad, I need you to come get Mason. Please. Right now. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask what happened. When your daughter calls you at dawn using that voice, the only thing that matters is getting your boots on. I was up out of bed before she finished the sentence, my wife Carol already sitting up beside me, watching my face the way she'd learned to over 34 years of marriage. It's Rachel, I said. Something's wrong. Carol didn't say a word. She just got up and started pulling on her robe. I drove the old Silverado into town, the one with 210,000 miles on it and a check engine light that had been on so long I'd stopped noticing it. Rachel and her husband Derek Whitfield lived in a gated community on the north side of town, the kind of place with a guard booth and a striped wooden arm that lifts when you scan a little plastic card. Derek had made his money in commercial real estate, flipping strip malls and office parks, and he never let anybody forget it. Every dinner at their house came with a tour of his newest acquisition. Every conversation eventually circled back to numbers with a lot of zeros on the end of them. I'd never liked him. Not from the first handshake. There was something underneath his smile that never quite reached the rest of his face, like he was performing warmth instead of feeling it. Carol used to tell me I was being an overprotective old fool, that not every man who married my daughter needed to pass some invisible background check I ran in my head. She wasn't wrong to say it, but she also didn't know what I used to do for a living. And there are things 28 years in that line of work teaches you about reading people that you can't ever fully turn off. The guard at the gate knew me by now and waved me through without slowing me down. I parked crooked in front of the house, didn't bother closing the truck door all the way, and walked straight up the path. I didn't knock. I tried the handle first, found it unlocked, and pushed the door open. The scene inside stopped me cold for half a second. Rachel was standing in the front hallway with Mason, my 7-year-old grandson, pressed against her hip. She had a suitcase in one hand and Mason's little dinosaur backpack slung over her shoulder. Her eyes were red and swollen, and there was a mark on her forearm, already turning the color of a bruise shaped exactly like a hand. Grandpa Pete, Mason said, running to me and wrapping his arms around my leg. I picked him up, the way I had 100 times before, and I kept my voice light and easy for his sake. Hey there, buddy. You ready for a little adventure? Grandma's waiting for you at the house. He nodded, too young to understand what he'd walked into, but old enough to feel that something was wrong. Rachel looked at me, and I could see the shame fighting with the relief in her face. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know who else to call. Don't you ever apologize for calling your father? I said. Where is he? At the office. He left an hour ago. He doesn't know I'm leaving. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Dad, he's been different for months, controlling. He froze the joint account last week because I asked him about a business trip he took. He grabbed my arm last night because I told him I wanted to visit you and Mom more. I've never seen him like that before. I felt something settle in my chest, cold and steady, the same feeling I used to get right before a raid. Not anger, exactly. Anger is loud and it makes you sloppy. This was quieter than that. This was clarity. We're leaving, I said. Right now. Get whatever you need. I'll carry Mason down. I carried my grandson out to the truck and buckled him into the back seat, his little sneakers kicking against the upholstery, already asking if we could stop for pancakes. Rachel loaded her suitcase into the bed and climbed into the passenger seat, her hands shaking as she pulled the seatbelt across her chest. I pulled out of that driveway slow and easy, nothing that would draw attention. The way I'd learned to leave a location decades ago when a fast exit was the surest way to get noticed. In the rearview mirror, I watched the guard booth shrink behind us, and for a moment I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Halfway down the county road, a black pickup truck came around the bend behind us, closing distance faster than the speed limit allowed. I recognized it before I could even see the driver clearly. Derek's truck. He must have turned around the second he got a text or a call from someone at the house. Someone who'd seen us leave. Rachel twisted around in her seat. Dad, that's him. I see him, I said, keeping my voice calm. Buckle Mason's seatbelt tighter and don't look back again. I didn't speed up. Speeding up is the first mistake amateurs make because it tells the other driver you're afraid, and fear invites aggression. Instead, I eased off the gas just slightly, letting him close the gap on his own terms, and I signaled early for the turn onto Route 9, giving him no reason to think I was running. When he pulled up alongside us at the next stretch of open road, I rolled my window down about 2 inches, just enough to hear him, and I kept both hands loose on the wheel. Derek leaned across his passenger seat and shouted through the gap in his own window, his face red, his jaw tight. Rachel, get out of that truck right now. This is not a game. I didn't answer him. I just kept driving at a steady 45 miles an hour, eyes on the road. Old man, you don't want to be involved in this, he shouted. You have no idea who you're dealing with. That last part almost made me smile. He had no idea how right he was and how wrong at the same time. He tried to force his truck closer to mine, and for one heartbeat, I thought he might actually clip the fender. But a delivery van coming the other direction forced him back into his lane. I used that window to take the next right, a narrow farm road most people in town didn't even know existed, cutting behind the old Hendricks orchard and coming out 2 miles later on the backside of the highway. By the time Derek realized which direction we'd gone, we were already gone, blending into the flow of morning traffic heading toward the interstate. Mason, thank God, had fallen asleep somewhere around the second turn, completely unaware of what his mother and grandfather had just navigated around him. We drove the rest of the way to my house in silence, out past the edge of town where the roads turn to gravel and the trees close in tighter around you. Carol was waiting on the porch when we pulled up, the same way she always was, and she didn't ask a single question before wrapping Rachel up in her arms. I carried Mason inside, still half asleep, and laid him down on the couch with the quilt Carol's mother had made 40 years ago. Then I stepped back out onto the porch, and Carol found me there a few minutes later holding 2 mugs of coffee. You have that look? She said, handing me one. What look is that? The one you used to get before you left for 3 weeks and told me you were going fishing? She sat down beside me. Pete, what is it you're not telling me? I looked out over the tree line, the sun just starting to climb over the ridge, painting everything gold. Derek's not just controlling, I said. Something about the way he talked back there. The confidence. Like he thought threatening a family in broad daylight was low risk. Men like that usually have a reason to feel untouchable. You think he's into something illegal. I think I want to find out before he finds out who he's actually dealing with. Carol didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand. Just be careful. You promised me retirement meant retirement. It does, I said. Mostly. The knock at the door came less than 3 hours later. Not Derek this time. A county sheriff's deputy, young, maybe 26, holding a thick manila envelope and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I'm looking for a Rachel Whitfield, he said. Rachel came to the door, and when he handed her the envelope, her hands trembled so badly the papers nearly slid out onto the porch floor. She opened it right there, standing in the doorway, and I watched the blood drain out of her face as she read. He's suing me, she whispered, for fraud. He says I've been stealing from his business accounts. Dad, this says I embezzled almost $80,000. I took the papers from her and scanned through them. The filing was detailed, professionally prepared, full of falsified transaction records and forged signatures that were close enough to fool anyone who wasn't looking carefully. It was signed off by a judge named Holloway, a name I recognized from the local paper, a man known around the county for his cozy relationships with developers who funded his campaigns every election cycle. Derek hadn't just hired a lawyer. He'd bought himself an ally on the bench. He told me he'd do something like this, Rachel said, sinking into a kitchen chair. He said if I ever tried to leave, he'd make sure I lost everything, that I'd never get custody of Mason, that no judge in this county would side against him. Carol wrapped her arms around Rachel, murmuring the same soft reassurances mothers have been offering their children since the beginning of time. I stood there with the papers in my hand, and I felt that same cold clarity settle back into my chest. Derek thought he had cornered a frightened young mother and her broken-down father. He had no idea he'd just declared war on a man who used to build cases against people far more dangerous than him for a living. I walked into my study, closed the door, and made a phone call I hadn't made in almost 6 years. "Frank," I said when the line picked up, "it's Pete Duncan. I need a favor, and I need you to trust me that it's worth calling in every chip you owe me." Frank Delgado had been my handler for the better part of a decade, back when we were both younger and a lot more reckless. He'd retired 2 years after I did, but men like Frank never really leave the work behind either. They just find quieter ways to stay in it. He ran a private financial forensics firm now, the kind that got hired by federal task forces when the trail led through shell companies and offshore accounts too tangled for regular auditors to untangle. "Pete Duncan," Frank said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Never thought I'd hear from you again unless one of us was dying." "Not yet," I said. "Frank, I need you to look into a man named Derek Whitfield. Commercial real estate, north side of Ashford County. My son-in-law." There was a pause on the line. "That bad? He threatened my daughter and my grandson this morning, and he's about to try to destroy her in court with a fabricated fraud case. I want to know what he's really hiding, because a man that confident usually has something a lot bigger than a messy divorce." "Give me 48 hours, Frank said. Those 48 hours were some of the longest of my life. Rachel barely slept, curled up in Mason's old childhood bedroom with him tucked against her side, jumping at every sound the house made, settling in the night. I sat up most of both nights on the porch, a shotgun leaning against the railing beside me, watching the tree line and the long gravel driveway, waiting. Derek called twice during that stretch. I let Rachel's phone ring through both times, but the second call left a voicemail, and she played it for me with her hands shaking. His voice was low and venomous. "You think hiding at your father's little farmhouse changes anything? I own half this county, Rachel. Judges, lawyers, people who owe me favors you can't even imagine. Bring Mason back to me, or I promise you, you'll spend the rest of your life explaining to a judge why you kidnapped your own son. And tell your old man to enjoy his last few peaceful nights in that house, because I know exactly where it is." I listened to it twice, memorizing every word, every threat, every piece of evidence he was so foolishly leaving on a recorded voicemail. Frank called back on the second evening, right as the sun was going down behind the ridge. "Pete," he said, and his voice had changed. It was tighter now, more careful. "You were right to call me. Derek Whitfield isn't just a real estate developer. He's laundering money through at least 4 shell companies tied to a construction fraud ring out of Miami. We're talking tens of millions in falsified contracts, kickbacks to county officials, and at least one connection to a group the Bureau has been trying to build a case against for 2 years. Your son-in-law isn't just an angry husband, Pete. He's sitting on something that could bring down half the local government if it ever saw daylight." I sat with that for a long moment, looking out at the darkening woods. "Frank, I need everything you have sent to Agent Cordero at the field office. Tell her Pete Duncan is calling in a favor, and that this needs eyes on it tonight, not next week." "Already on it," Frank said. "And Pete, watch your back. Men like this don't go down quiet." He didn't know how right he was. It happened just after midnight, 3 days after Rachel first showed up on my porch with a suitcase and a frightened little boy. I heard the gravel crunching under tires long before headlights swept across the living room curtains, 2 vehicles this time, moving slow and deliberate up my driveway. Carol appeared in the hallway, already awake, already dressed, the way she always managed to be ready the instant she sensed something coming. "Get Rachel and Mason into the back bedroom," I said quietly. "Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "Pete, I've got this," I said, and something in my voice must have told her I meant it, because she nodded once and disappeared down the hallway without another word. I walked out onto the porch alone, a mug of coffee in one hand, exactly the way I used to do decades ago when I wanted the men across from me to believe I wasn't afraid of anything they could throw at me. Derek climbed out of the lead truck, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize, broad-shouldered types who moved like they'd been hired for exactly this kind of work. "Evening, Derek," I said, sipping my coffee like it was any other quiet night on my porch. "Where's my wife?" he said, his voice flat and cold. All the charm gone now. "She's not going anywhere with you tonight." He laughed, short and humorless, and gestured toward the 2 men beside him. "Old man, I don't think you understand the position you're in. I could make you disappear and nobody in this county would ask a single question, because I own the people who'd be asking. Now I'm going to walk in there, and I'm going to take my son, and you're going to stand there and watch me do it, because there is nothing you can do to stop me." I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing, slow and deliberate. "Derek, I want you to know something before this goes any further. For 28 years before I ever fixed a single lawnmower in that garage of mine, I worked for the DEA. I spent most of that career doing exactly what you think can't be done to a man like you, building quiet, patient, airtight cases against people who thought their money made them untouchable. His face flickered, just for a second, doubt cutting through the arrogance. "You're bluffing," he said. "Check your phone," I said. "I imagine you're about to get a very interesting call." Right on cue, headlights swept up the driveway behind his own vehicles. 3 unmarked sedans and a single black SUV that I recognized as belonging to the Bureau's regional task force. Agent Maria Cordero stepped out first, a woman I'd trained personally 15 years earlier, back when she was fresh out of the academy and I was teaching her how to read a room before it turned violent. "Derek Whitfield," she called out, walking up the driveway with 4 agents fanning out behind her. "You're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. And after that voicemail you left my client's daughter tonight, we'll be adding threats against a federal witness to that list." The 2 men flanking Derek looked at each other and then quietly raised their hands, clearly deciding this wasn't a fight worth having. Derek himself just stood there in my driveway, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out, the confidence draining out of him the way water drains from a cracked glass. "You," he finally said, staring at me. "You did this." "No, son," I said. "You did this. I just made sure the right people found out about it. They put him in handcuffs right there under my porch light, and I watched him go without a single ounce of satisfaction in my chest. Only relief, the kind that settles into your bones after you've been holding your breath for 3 days straight." Carol came out onto the porch once the vehicles had pulled away, Rachel right behind her with Mason still asleep in her arms, having somehow slept through the entire thing. Rachel looked at me, and the fear that had been sitting behind her eyes for months was finally, completely gone, replaced with something that looked almost like disbelief. She crossed the porch and wrapped her arms around me, Mason still cradled against her shoulder. "Dad, I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said, holding her steady. "It's over, sweetheart. He's never going to hurt you or Mason again. I promise you that." Carol wrapped her arms around both of us, resting her head against my back, and we stood there together on that porch as the sky started turning gray at the edges with the first hint of morning. It's been almost a year since that night. Derek Whitfield never made it to trial. Faced with the financial evidence Frank uncovered, the recorded voicemail threatening a federal witness, and testimony from 2 of his own business partners who flipped rather than go down with him, his lawyers pushed for a plea deal within weeks. He's currently serving a 38-year sentence in a federal penitentiary 2 states away, and the construction fraud ring he was laundering money for has been almost entirely dismantled, with 4 other men indicted based on the financial trail Frank's firm helped uncover. Rachel didn't just survive that year. She rebuilt her entire life from the ground up. A federal judge cleared her name completely once the fabricated fraud charges were exposed as part of Derek's broader criminal enterprise, and her lawyer filed a civil suit against what remained of Derek's frozen assets for emotional and financial damages. The settlement was substantial enough that she'll never have to worry about providing for Mason again. She used part of it to open a small bakery downtown, something she'd always dreamed about doing but never had the freedom to pursue. Mason is 7 years old and thriving, spending most weekends out here at the farmhouse, chasing chickens around the yard and falling asleep in the same spot on the couch where his mother once cried herself to sleep 3 nights in a row. Carol and I are still out here on the edge of town. Same gravel driveway, same tree line, same porch. The old Silverado finally gave out last spring, and I replaced it with another one just as old, because Carol says I've earned the right to be stubborn about a few things. Some mornings I still sit out here with a cup of coffee before the sun's all the way up, listening to the birds start their racket in the trees, and I think about how close we came to losing everything and how quiet the whole thing was in the end. I spent 28 years hunting men who thought money and power made them invincible, and I earned every single day of this retirement. But if there's one thing that entire ordeal taught me, it's that a father's instincts don't clock out just because his badge did. If you come after my family, I don't care how many judges you think you own or how many zeros are in your bank account. You'll find out exactly what happens when you wake up a man who spent 30 years learning exactly how people like you fall apart. The lesson in all of this, the one I hope sticks with anyone listening, is that real strength has never needed to raise its voice. Derek mistook my quiet for weakness, the same way he mistook Rachel's kindness for something he could control. He never once considered that the frail old man drinking coffee on his porch had already won before Derek even pulled into that driveway. The loudest man in the room is almost never the most dangerous one. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is just sitting there, sipping his coffee, waiting for the sun to come up. If this story meant something to you tonight, if it reminded you that family is worth protecting at any cost, then do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to know how many of you out there understand exactly what I mean when I say a father never really retires.